We all have this kind of romanticized view of a brand newborn baby. The lights are going to be soft and it's going to be just wonderful and everybody's going to be ready for a photograph, right? And then when things don't match that and a baby is not interested in breathing, if you've not seen all this, you go, my goodness, what happened? It's such a clash between what I thought was going to be and what is. And I often will say the success of every single patient and certainly every single baby is all kind of based on the currency of communication between the team and the parents. And we're all aiming to the same thing, for your baby to be able to get home and grow and be healthy and be happy. But on a daily basis, we need to work together and talk.
Welcome to Evening Rounds, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes in medicine. My name is Dr. Anthony Hilliard, and tonight I have the unique and somewhat uncomfortable opportunity to interview my boss and CEO of our medical group, Dr. Riccardo Peverini. Dr. Peverini wears many important hats, both as a neonatologist and organizational leader. Dr. Peverini pioneered one of the first electronic medical systems here at Loma Linda, designed to inform decision-making and predict health outcomes for the most vulnerable patients, our newborn babies. Well, Richard, it's great to have you here this evening. I'm really excited that you're our guest tonight on our Evening Rounds podcast. We're going to talk about a lot of, I think, interesting subjects tonight, but I want to ask you a very, very important question. Probably the most important question I ask you all evening, and that is, how many flights of stairs did you climb yesterday?
Anthony, first of all, it's nice to be here, and thank you for having me. I'm sorry I only had 92 yesterday.
Wow.
92. Busy day, huh? Hard to get away?
Right.
I've heard a rumor that you, when you don't have enough steps, will also go hiking at night. Is that true?
That's an accurate rumor.
How does that night hiking work? Are you just, the path so well, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I have several routes, and I do know several of these paths up in the hills. The South Hills of Loma Linda are a lot of fun, and so depending on how many more steps I need or how many more flights of stairs I need, it will sort of depend. It'll drive what I'm doing or not doing.
So obviously it's become a little bit of a game with you and I. I'll get a text from you on the weekend on a Sabbath where you've done a hike to some mountain peak somewhere and you'll have some inordinate amount of flights of stairs. But during the week and so forth, I know you to break away for a few minutes and go climb those stairs. And I figure it does more than just meet a mathematical or a number goal that you have. So I guess my question for you is, those quick breaks of exercise or bursts of energy, what do they do for you?
Well, a couple of things. One is sometimes I am thinking about what just took place and I'm sort of replaying that in my mind. Other times I'm sort of rehearsing in my mind a difficult conversation that I'm about to have, or what would it be like to be the recipient of that conversation? One of the fun things I've started doing in the last few years is occasionally I'll say to somebody, instead of just Zoom meeting, why don't we walk around campus and talk? And so, we might head up to the Centennial and loop around, and it's actually kind of an engaging thing to do, just to talk somebody and have a, quote, interview that way.
Mm-hmm. And you've had a very, very long career here at Loma Linda. How long have you been with us?
Well, I joined campus in 1980 when I got accepted to medical school, so it sounds like 41 years.
That's incredible. And you've done so much in that time. You've held so many different roles and done such amazing things. I've heard tell that back in the 80s, you were very instrumental specifically in getting a computer and computers on our units, and kind of were very, very on the ground level of really kind of implementing some different things that have led now to what we know now as, electronic medical records. Tell us a little bit about what it was like back then and what you've been able to do.
One of the things that I did towards the tail end of medical school is I had the privilege of being at the NIH, and there was a 10-week sort of symposium on computers in medicine. I came back really energized by that and scrounged up some money and gave to myself as a sort of finishing medical school gift a very first Mac computer when it first came out.
How big was that?
I wish I had hung on to it. Now there are sort of museum pieces that are worth a lot of money. But, when in the middle of residency and then I started my neonatal fellowship, I recognized that a lot of the daily progress notes on certain patients had a lot of overlap. And the flow was sit somewhere and handwrite a progress note. I thought, why don't I take some of that text and just use it on a daily basis and make the relevant changes? How did the vitals change? What's the new hemoglobin? What's the latest head circumference, et cetera? And so I talked somebody into letting me put in a personal computer in one of the call rooms in the NICU. And this sort of thing kind of mushroomed. So I was just basically toying with it, having fun, but then it actually wove itself into a children's hospital-wide so-called progress note system. And I've got a lot of, support from people in information systems, from the leadership of the Department of Pediatrics. And it was what got me really intrigued with what's a good way of writing a note that has multiple, if you will, consumers, ultimately the patient or the patient's family, but there may be a social worker, there may be a consultant. How do you write notes in a way that is succinct? And that problem, I don't think, has been solved. Maybe maybe voice to text will one day sort of, or maybe brain to paper, right? So I'll think of a note and it'll come onto paper, right?
I like that.
So we talk about NICU. I'm going to have you tell folks what that means in case someone's not aware of the term. But as a neonatologist, I'm a cardiologist. We're not the sharpest tool in the shed. But as I understand what...
That's not true, by the way.
What I understand neonatologists to do is to take care of the most vulnerable little tiny humans. Is that a fair, accurate description of what you do?
Well, the word simply means newly born. And so the amazing thing is that neonatal ICU is taking care of this huge spectrum of babies. They're all recently born, some extremely prematurely. We'll take care of babies now that are born 17 weeks before the mom's due date. They're at 23 weeks. And they may weigh 430, 480 grams, so, less than a pound, right? Wow. But then there are some term babies that unexpectedly were born with an undiagnosed congenital heart disease, or they're overwhelmed by sepsis. So really, our most vulnerable part of our society is the newly born, and they may be premature, but they may be term babies that have some unexpected challenge.
Well, that hits home for me. Sophia, she's almost 17 now. I had to do the math. I want to make sure I get that right. So she had a very uncomplicated, or my wife had a very uncomplicated pregnancy. But when Sophia was born, again, not a pediatrician, but I see movies and I remember them supposed to cry. And she was quiet. And I'm like, doesn't make a lot of sense. So then appropriately, I think the pediatrician was sort of slapping Sophia. Still nothing, not a peep. Then I look over and she's starting to turn a little bit like the color of your shirt. That's probably not very good. And so I remember her getting intubated in the labor and delivery room and then being wheeled away in what looked like an astronaut tent and going over to the NICU. And there, as an adult physician, I was freaked out. I was paranoid. One is the blood pressures and the heart rates were all in numbers that, as an adult physician, we would not be comfortable with. And secondly, we were giving like 8 cc's of fluid, things like this, and I was scared out of my mind. Now, I remember the neonatologist coming to me and said, Anthony's going to be okay. And I'm like, well, how do you know? He was like, well, this is usually, And sure enough, 2 days later, she got angry as all get out. She turned red and the tube was ready to be removed. But it was at that moment in time that I realized these babies, without some amazing care, would die. And so it puts into light what you do. And when you say 400, I don't even know what that means. I mean, if you take your hand, show me what a baby of that size looks like.
His or her little body would be sort of where my fingers are, and a pound is 454 grams. So we have babies that are right at that number, slightly lower, sometimes slightly higher. And obviously they have all sorts of challenges. Their lungs are not ready to do the job. But what you just talked about is an amazing thing. We all have this kind of romanticized view of a brand newborn baby. The lights are going to be soft and it's going to be just wonderful and everybody's going to be ready for a photograph, right? And then when things don't match that, and a baby like Sophia is not interested in breathing, or a baby has got some other thing, whether visual or not, it's a huge clash between what we wanted and what is in fact the reality. And walking a mom or a dad to the bedside of their baby, and you see things that you may never have seen before. We've seen monitors and we've seen TV shows, but you see your baby with a plastic tube in their mouth, and you see this machine that's pushing air in and out, and you see a catheter that's coming out of the umbilical artery and one that's coming out of the umbilical vein, and you see other things. It can be overwhelming. If you've not seen all this, you go, my goodness, what happened? It's such a clash between what I thought was going to be and what is. So I will typically methodically say, this is for that, and this is for that. And here's an important person for you to get to know, your baby's nurse, and here's a respiratory therapist. And I often will say it's really important for you to understand that there is no such thing as a question that is stupid or dumb. If something doesn't make sense, please reach out. We will come to you if there's a brand new diagnostic, test that's come back that we think you need to know about. But the success of every single patient, and certainly every single baby, is all kind of based on the currency of communication between the team and the parents. Please explain to me why you're not doing this or why you are doing that. And then I'll often say to the mom, your touch and your voice and your physical presence is so important that while we can do certain things with our antibiotics and with our ventilator and with this or that, we cannot replace your being here. So we have a joint project. The unit, the nurses, the physicians, the team, the respiratory therapists, and mom and dad. And with the Lord's help and with this passage of time, we're all aiming to the same thing, for your baby to be able to get home and grow and be healthy and be happy. But on a daily basis, we need to work together and talk.
Where do you think that passion for the tiny, tiny babies of this world came from for you?
I think that there were several sort of turning points. Very first week of as a brand new doctor, as an intern, having a physician role model for me how to care and love the mom of a baby that had just passed away. In my brain, I was sure that the reason that baby had died was that there was something I had failed to do or that I had done wrong. And in fact, that baby, even today, would probably not survive. But when I saw a role model for me, care and empathy, not only for the baby, but for the mom, it just sort of got me to say, I want to be like that person. And, we all run into incredible role models, and we don't get it until many years later and say, that one event was a turning point for my life.
Yeah.
So there are times when you're taking care of these vulnerable patients, and things don't go well. They're just not able to make a recovery. And you've spent many hours, many days taking care of these patients. You've newly met the parents of these vulnerable patients. How do you come back the next day and take care of the others that are still there?
It is a great question. how do you compartmentalize, every part of medicine, but certainly neonatology has what I call the double-edged sword. There's no greater joy than with our technology, nursing staff, respiratory therapy, our consultants, our surgeons, to have a baby do better than the odds were. It's huge satisfaction. And then have that family later acknowledge it, right? And you say, well, I was part of the team that made this happen, and the Lord bless his family. But the flip of it is, do everything that you think needs to be done, excellent, care, good decision making, and lose that baby. There's no, I think, lower low than having a baby unexpectedly lose their life. And then to be able to go to the next room and say, okay, we're going to sort of pretend that didn't happen, and we're going to try and be good decision makers with the set of issues this baby has. That's a really challenging thing to compartmentalize, to be kind, to be empathetic, to lose a baby, and then to say, let me pretend that didn't happen and go and have a reset button and talk about the next patient. That's really hard. And I don't think I do. And if I come home and I get asked, what's wrong with you? Typically the answer is, you mean more than usual. But the second is, we lost a baby today. I'm just really sad.
Do you have patients that stick with you? Patient cases that, I'm sure you get a lot of cards and letters with, how they're graduating high school or they're doing really well. But do you have cases that that are positive and both negative? And how do you kind of...
I remember patients, some of them by name and some of them by the physical location in the neonatal ICU where they were.
Wow.
And I say, well, in this corner is where we had the transposition of the great vessels that was doing well. And so when I round, I will say, we're here in the same spot where this happened, and you don't have to know the details, but this is how to think about it. But I can't help but also mention a little boy who is probably now 14 or 15, whose name is Tommy. And I was the admitting neonatologist, and good medicine says that if your resuscitation efforts do not work, sometime after 5 to maybe 10 minutes, you should stop. And I was ready to call the code. I was ready to say, we're going to stop chest compressions. We're going to stop ventilating through the tube. This baby's not going to make it. And then starting to hear the pulse oximeter sort of go up in pitch and see the heart rate come up, and going to that family and saying, your little guy had a really, really rough start. I don't know what's going to happen, but I want you to be ready for your little boy. And they had already named him before he was born, for Tommy, to have a lot of challenges. If he survives, and I don't know if he will, you might face this and this and this. And then I now have pictures of Tommy and I as a kid in high school.
Wow.
And yes, he's got some challenges. He's got a mild a bit of cerebral palsy. His gait is not 100% normal, but he's a normally intelligent boy. And it's a reminder that when we face something, we don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
I was doing the math. We can have about 80, newly born babies in the neonatal intensive care unit. Is that right?
Right. The unit here at Loma Linda is licensed for 84 beds, and sometimes we're at that number.
Wow.
So if you think about it, in that unit, there's upwards of well over 6,000 years of life in front of them.
Exactly.
That team is responsible for managing. That's an awesome responsibility in my mind. On the adult side, we'll do some amazing things, but we may extend life 3 years or 5 years, or if things go well and it's a younger patient, maybe 20 years. But every single one of those is a multiplier of 80 plus probably in this day and age. That's a phenomenal number when you think about it.
That's a really good way of thinking about it. And then just as importantly, when a baby with, again, the team's sort of concerted efforts, the entire hospital infrastructure does in fact do better than what we were worried about. Not only is there like that longevity in front of them, there's also a source of happiness for that family. Mm-hmm. The flip of it is, of course, is, the lost potential when a baby doesn't survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, it's tough to think about. You're a father of 2. How did your experiences with tiny babies, how did that shape you when you became a father?
I remember very well our first son being born, and I guess because of genetics, he was not interested in eating. Mm. And my head told me, he's going to be fine. But my heart was like, is he okay? And I don't think I've ever stayed awake for an entire 48 hours before that time or since then. And I've taken Daniel back to the place where he was born. And we've talked about, when somebody's going through something as a mom or as a dad, they're very worried about the clash between what you want and what your, the quote, the facts tell you. And so I think what I learned is to empathize with families, because you can hear all the data. We're using this ventilator rate, and I'm happy to tell you the platelets are up, et cetera, et cetera. But what your heart is worried about is, my little guy going to be okay?
That's right. Yeah, that's a real emotion. I'm sure you handle a lot of parents that just want that question answered.
Right.
Wow.
So we've talked about what you do, and who you are, sort of what drives you to do some amazing things. But I wanted to backtrack a little bit. I wanted to know, and I don't know this, so I'm asking, even though I know you very well, I don't know this about you. I want to know, were you little Ricardo, little Ricky? Talk to me about where you grew up and how some of those stories shaped who you are today.
Like a lot of people, I was shaped by the home in which I grew and the love that I got from my parents. I was born in Uruguay and grew up in the suburbs of Buenos Aires in Argentina. And I was all of 10 or 11 when my dad informed us that we were going to go to Los Angeles. And by the way, they speak a different language there. I thought it was a horrible idea. And so today I look back and I say I'm so privileged to know and understand, 2 cultures and the way that people think. And, particularly my mother, I had pretty bad asthma as a kid. And so I actually didn't go to school until I was a second grader. And, my mom was my first teacher. And, the care that I got, maybe because she was worried about how it was going to turn out, in turn, made me really focus on, kind of looking out for kids and looking out for those that are having a hard time with their health.
So you are coming to a country where English is the primary language. How much English did you speak when you arrived?
So my aunt, who's a wonderful woman, said, if someone says anything to you, please say these few words: I don't speak English.
Wow.
So I memorized that. I got a little sack lunch and I was dropped off at school. And I actually have friends today that say, oh yeah, we remember you saying I don't speak English. And we said to you, but you are speaking English.
So you went to school not knowing any English? Not
knowing a word. And it was, I had a wonderful 6th grade teacher who kind of made me, I think, her project. And in those days, I was truly the minority. Oftentimes, there's a large number of people that have bilingual backgrounds. There was one other kid that spoke Spanish, and I just listened a lot. And somewhere out there, 4 or 5 months into this run, I started understanding. And then a few more months, I started maybe able to articulate some things. So it's just a fascinating thing that, while I was going through it, I didn't think about it. But now, if somebody tells me a joke in Spanish, I can enjoy it. And, the gift that's given me in clinical work, if you're talking to somebody and you can, even though my sixth grade's version of Spanish is not that sophisticated, to reach out to a mom and say to her in her own language, this is what's going on. This is what we're doing about it. This is what to expect. You see a little bit of sort of a person kind of becoming at ease because somebody's speaking to them in their own native tongue.
Wow. I imagine that that's a huge impact. And I feel like that probably really, that experience of maybe feeling kind of out of the loop when you first started school and maybe not understanding people has such a huge impact on your patients, feeling kind of comforted by you in that way. Do you think that's where that empathy maybe comes in there?
Probably. I just really enjoy being able to give people, maybe the micro details, but here's the big picture. The context is that through the team's efforts and with the blessing of the Lord, this is where we're aiming for your little baby to be able to go home.
Yeah. You enjoy math. I think you even tell jokes sometimes that are mathematically based. Where did the love of, you talked earlier about computers and having one of the first computers. Where did the love of what we call computer science or mathematics, where was that born? Where was that originated for you?
Certainly not from my mom and dad. They've often wondered whether I am their natural-born child because algebra or calculus or, I joke around a lot about, oh, that's a palindromic prime number. Isn't that awesome, right? They go like, what is wrong with you? But I remember, to answer your question, hitting ninth grade and having a wonderful teacher who, by the way, I just got to meet again after many years and to personally thank him for his influence in my life. Just look out for me. And so because of Dale, his last name is Jacobson, because of Dale Jacobson, I have a teaching slide rule in my office. And it's a symbol of, he made it, this is fun. Let me show you how much fun this is. If you move all these variables over here, and if you do this fancy little thing, this will happen. And he just loved it. And I thought, wow, this guy's having fun. Maybe I can too.
That is incredible. That math is fun. I don't think I've had that experience personally, but I'm going to trust you on that, Dr. Peverini.
I think I've had years of therapy because I had to do math to get into medical school, that's a separate subject.
I think it's so unique how your mind works in that way and how you have that love for math and kind of the different ways that has influenced your career. But one thing we have to talk about is your love of Legos. I think that's probably very tied to how your brain works and how you kind of organize things and structure things. But tell us about your love of Legos.
Well, I did not grow up with Legos, but as our two boys, who are only about a year and a half apart, were, in that range of 4, 5, 6 years of age, there was time with Dad on Sunday afternoons. So I would cart him to the office and we had a Lego set. And so one of my son's job was to find the next piece. That's actually one of the hardest things in a big set. Like, I can't find that piece, right? And then the other one was let's put it in. So, this has, 372 steps, and each of them had find that piece, put that piece. And then their roles would trade, right? And so at the end of several Sundays, here we had a thing that we had built together. Now, they've appropriately outgrown their Legos. I am what people call an AFOL, an adult fan of Lego. I'm probably one of the few people that I know that still gets a Lego catalog every couple months. And then somewhat amused when I purchase something, and I enjoy Friday nights to maybe start working on a set. I'm now going to be working on a Lego Porsche 911. I'm looking forward to that. But I'm often reminded that whatever Lego I brought home is going to be balanced by some Lego set that leaves the home.
It's a zero-sum game.
Something like that.
How many pieces is your Porsche?
I don't know for a fact. I know that it ends with 2 different ways in which you can finish it. And I think it's something like 1,200 pieces, but I'm sorry, I don't know.
Can you drive it when you're done? That is incredible.
You can just look at it and take pictures.
Okay.
One thing I would like to chat about a bit, and I think it's important for us to learn about, is your role here at Loma Linda as a physician leader. Your handprints are all over the physicians who work here, myself included. You manage and lead all the physicians that work here at Loma Linda University Health through our faculty medical group, whether they're surgeons or pediatricians or internists or anesthesiologists, emergency room physicians. That's your baby. That is a mammoth job in my mind. And you've done it remarkably well. The group has continued to grow. We now have the opportunity to take care of patients even outside of our walls here at Loma Linda. That all being said, what I would like to hear from you, and I'm guessing other physicians who are listening to this podcast would as well, is if you were to give us words of advice in terms of leadership. And it's not necessarily having to manage a practice group, but we're all leaders in our own rights. Whether you're a school teacher, whether you're a firefighter, whether you're a physician, etc. What would you say?
It's a great question. And, what you make reference to, the role that I have had together with many others in sort of putting together a more cohesive medical group and the play between that and the electronic medical record at Loma Linda. All those things, A, no single person does them. B, ultimately the currency is trust and communication. So, the thing that I still am learning on a daily basis is try and talk and listen to as many people as you can. You're never going to reach unanimous consensus, but you're going to get the sense that this direction seems to make the most sense, and then advocate for it and say, this is what I heard you guys say, and this is where we ought to head. Here's an important sort of direction that we can take today to get towards that goal. We're never going to be there, but the journey of saying we spoke to each other about what would get us to this. The simple fact is anything that we do has to line up with how do we maintain the blessing that we were the recipients of. In other words, an environment that looks out for great care and great concurrent education. And the care of patients and the education are interdependent things. So we've been given the gift of a system that focuses on doing those 2 things in the context of serving the Lord. Now, what can we do today so that we make sure that we continue to have that infrastructure, create and support and guide the future generation of clinicians, and whether they're physicians or nurses or pharmacists or whatever discipline, what can we do to say it's not just what we're doing? It could be something that's maybe mundane, right? Pulling some network cable or figuring out how we do the web page for vaccine scheduling, whatever it is. It's why are we doing it? And the why has always got to be in the context of serving others and thereby serving the Lord. And so I know you started with one question and I drifted off to a different topic, but what drives me, but I think it drives a lot of us, is what is it that we're doing today that will maintain that infrastructure and that notion of protecting and supporting the next generation of Christian care providers?
Well, I think that's a brilliant answer. What you started with, I think could take us a long ways in many aspects of our lives, regardless of the profession you choose: trust and communication. I feel like some days in the world, there's a void of either one of them or both. So every podcast we do, I like to end with the following question. Evening rounds means to you what? And the reason why I like to end with that question is the intention of the title is to provide reflection for physicians. I don't know what that means to each individual. For me, it means something. For someone else, it means something else. But when you hear the term evening rounds, what does it mean to you?
Well, as a fellow and then as an attending, evening rounds was not the term we used. The term we used was midnight rounds.
Wow.
And the idea is simply that we will go with each of the team members, the residents, the fellow, the nurse practitioners, to the bedside of each of the babies and speak with that nurse and with that respiratory therapist and say, what do we need to address? Have we ordered what we need for tomorrow's labs? Is there an x-ray that we need to follow up? And do that starting in room 1 and ending all the way in room 14 and then going to the next unit. Do that on every single baby. And sometimes it may be only 60 or 70. Sometimes it might be 80 or 90. But we want to make sure that every baby is tucked in before midnight.
I like that you said only 60 or 70. I will remember that. It's not evening rounds to everybody. Sometimes it is indeed midnight rounds.
I like it. What does evening rounds mean in your personal life?
Probably up in the hills talking to the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you make time to do both of those things, to train the future generations and to also take time to be with the Lord and to walk with the Lord.
And both seem to be a little bit more of a reflective mindset, whether it's talking to the residents and fellows about certain diagnoses or conditions that come together and having an opportunity to provide your experience and spend a little time sharing those stories and sharing stories with the Lord.
Yep.
Well, again, it's been a great honor and privilege to have you, and I can't wait to chat with you again.
The privilege has been mine. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.